So again, I want to thank everyone for taking your time to be present with us. We have an excellent panel as always, but we're here with the 2024 People's Social Impact Conference. I'm your host, Bryan Knight, one of the co-founders of the Afro-Caribbean Business Network, and here as the board member, also a board member of SETSI, the Social Economy Through Social Inclusion. And we always begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all of those who toiled without compensation or compassion. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we currently stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. We have a wonderful panel today talking about credit unions and climate action. So I just want to read off who's with us, and then I'll have them introduce themselves. So JN, make sure it's right. Gilfoy of Meridian Union. We have Cadungog, the Executive Director of the Foundation for Environmental Stewardship. Julie Segal, the Senior Manager of Climate Finance and Environmental Defense Canada. Liz, Manager of Purpose Integration at Libro Credit Union. I'll check also Bryan Duarte, the founder of Black Tech Capital. So JN, I'd love to start with you. If you just give a background on the current work that you're doing.
Nice to see everybody here. Welcome. So Meridian is Ontario's largest credit union. We've been around for, 75 years or so. And sort of, ESG principles, and Liz will support this, of credit unions, because we're a cooperative. And so we have a set of principles that we follow around things like, cooperation amongst, making sure we're delivering equity to all of our members. It's member owned and member run. So I took on the role of CEO a couple of years ago, and on a path to formalize everything that we're doing. Come out with climate commitments. We also came out with an ESG report starting in 2021, and we rapidly evolved that so that we're in line with our regular annual reporting cycle. And so we're on a journey. I would say we're still in the beginning stages of figuring out how do we help businesses, because we have a strong commercial business, how we help them succeed in this new world of thinking about climate as part of their business.
Excellent. I really appreciate you being here. And Kat, I'll go to you next if you want to let the audience know about your remarkable work.
Hi, everybody. Really excited to be here today. I'm the Executive Director of FES, and within this organization, we finance, we engage with, and we really try to sustain youth-led initiatives across the country as this final generation that's really equipped and positioned to be able to tackle climate change. But we do particularly focus in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, and within like Black and Indigenous and racialized communities as well. And we do this through two different programs through FES, one of them being the Youth Harbor, where we pool philanthropic funds and we redistribute it across different movements across the country, really focusing on groups that are trying to shape public narratives, cultivate the political will, so we can actually garner the public and civic support to deploy these solutions that we just need so rapidly deployed using this justice lens. And then we also work with our Now for Net Zero team, and we provide these small little grants to about like $15,000 to $20,000 to rural, remote, and Indigenous communities in the Maritimes, in Northern Alberta, and kind of the places that you really wouldn't suspect that you'd be able to find money on energy and mitigation projects to really engage young people from a very early age on what does a new climate economy actually really look like. So far since 2021, we've dispersed around $1 million across 80 different organizations. And I've seen a lot of these grants fundamentally kind of turn into really interesting investments. There was one group that we gave $10,000 to, and then they were able to use that money on policy advocacy to then leverage a $100 million investment in the city of Edmonton on bike infrastructure. So youth are typically not seen as a demographic that can really enable this type of change, but through the work at FES, the Youth Harbor, and Now for Net Zero, we've seen that this is truly just not the case. So we're an entirely youth-led and youth-serving organization. So also unique to FES is that all of our staff is 30 and under, and our board is comprised of 50% youth, and we have good governance. We are very aligned with its ESG principles, and we have a very obvious interest in this world of finance. And a lot of the orgs that we support are really interested in credit unions as an alternative to the big banks. So back over to you.
Yeah, appreciate that, Kat. And Liz, I'll go to you next to, please introduce yourself to our colleagues and attendees and let us know about your remarkable work as well.
Yeah, thank you. So Liz Arkinstall, and I manage purpose integration here at Libro. And so based on that title, we are a purpose-driven financial cooperative, also based in Ontario. And I would say that we've been on a journey to, integrate being purpose-driven into everything that we do. And so from a climate perspective, over the past number of years, we've identified it as a strategic priority. We've been doing lots of work behind the scenes to make sure we understood what it will mean for our owners and to support our owners in the transition to a low carbon economy. And so I will say, I think more of our work has kind of been behind the scenes, so to speak, gathering the information, helping us understand and set targets that have an actionable plan behind them. So right now, we have kind of those portfolio level targets as an organization where we want to head, and we're moving in that direction, but really kind of digging deeper into what that means for our unique ownership and how we would really support them. And so in digging into that information, we are one of the largest agricultural lenders in Canada as a credit union as well. And so with that, no surprise that when we kind of dug in to see where our emissions sit and where we want to make, where we would have the biggest impact in making reductions, it is in our business segment and specifically in our agricultural community. And so with that being a maybe more challenging area to make some change immediately, we want to make sure that we're really connecting with our owners. And so that's really kind of been top of mind for what we're up to right now, is just engaging with our owners. How are they feeling? What do they know? And how might we support them in that? And so another thing that I think, we talk about, credit unions have been doing this work for a number of years and are continuing to do so. We're well positioned there and being held more to account on it, which I think is great, for the environment and for obviously that social role. And so a couple of years back, we became the first Canadian credit union to offer us to sure. see that, see that blended triple bottom line opportunity for not only us as a credit union, but for our owners as well. Yeah, lots of work to do, but we're pleased to be making some of these strides.
Yeah, it feels like momentum is building. So appreciate you being here with us, Liz. And Julie, I'll go to you next. If you can introduce yourself and let us know about your remarkable work as well.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be in this conversation with you all. So I work with Environmental Defence Canada. We are one of the largest environmental policy, advocacy, and research organizations. And I'm on our climate finance file. So my work combines finance, climate, and policy, which in many audiences, when you put those three things together, people go, okay, those are the three most boring things I've ever heard of. Why are we putting them together and talking about them? But they're super impactful and interrelated. And I love opportunities to highlight to people why putting those three things together, climate, finance, policy, is so important and exciting. So maybe just a bit of background about myself, kind of diving into that. So first of all, calling today from Toronto, where the traditional territories of the Mississaugas, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. And I've been here and with environmental defense for about 2 years. Before that, I was actually in sustainable investing, managing a portfolio of impact investments at the McConnell Foundation. I led the foundation's commitment to aligning their investments with net zero, and all of that was really super. But I kind of got to realizing, okay, we can perfect this foundation's endowment, this investment portfolio, to have really high impact. But what about the rest of the financial system? We've heard from some credit union colleagues on this call who are doing really excellent work. And I would say a big part of that is because of the model of credit unions, where you're accountable to different interests. You have more of a long-term lens. Your stakeholders are your shareholders in a way. But again, going back to the rest of the financial system, what's happening there? Not necessarily the best things when it comes to climate action, social equity, or tackling inequality. So I realized, well, we have financial policy for a reason, and we have climate policy increasingly in Canada, but where those two things intersect was, and still to a large part is, a significant void. So that's why climate finance and policy is so exciting. Putting it all together, we can think about what are the policies behind our financial system, how does that motivate climate action, and how do we retool the financial system, frankly, modernize it so that it's working in the best interest of people and planet. So that's the high level of who I am and what I do.
I appreciate that, and we'll definitely dig in a bit more as we have the conversation. But Bryan, would love to have you introduce yourself to the audience and tell us about the work that you've been doing in the clean tech space.
Thank you very much, Ryan. Glad to be here, with this great panel. So name years, but always had an interest in, how else to do it different, even going back to my university days where we were involved in doing natural gas vehicles when we thought that might be the next step for the future. However, as my career evolved, a number of different businesses, more and more started focusing on the sustainability aspects, helping businesses figure out what sustainability initiative they should take. And back then also started in 2018 working with the Center for Social Innovation, their climate ventures group. And I was managing, advising entrepreneurs in the climate tech space. And it was, Black entrepreneurs, women entrepreneurs, any other racialized groups. Those were the ones that were not getting the funding. So that's where founded Black Tech Capital to put the focus in that area. And overall in the Canadian landscape, I see we do a fairly good job when you look at grants when these companies started, right? And we've got lots of great innovations coming in the climate tech space, but then there's this big gap before, in the early stages for founders to get funding, the pre-seed or early seed stages, as it's called. Just when they're early revenue or pre-revenue, how do you get these climate initiatives going? And that's the space that we like to play in, right? Is, investing in founders that would normally be overlooked, but then also helping to bring that climate action, because I don't think it goes without saying that it's definitely needed, that we need all these different solutions. And I say it's not a technological challenge we face, it's people challenges. It's stuff like Julie brought up, how do we change financial policies to make it easy for getting funding in today's, and I love the great work that the credit unions are doing as well. But we're playing a specific role, and it's not just venture capital for the sake of making. Yes, of course we have investors. Yes, we're looking for a return on that investment, but we also as equally track the metrics that those companies are having. So we're looking at impact metrics. We track on the environmental side as well as the social side. So we've got a little bit of a different approach of how we're doing our investing lens from.
Excellent. And again, really appreciate that you're part of the conversation. Well, I'd love to give us context on how we're tackling this mission. When we're talking about climate action, would you like to give us your perspective on how this approach and where you feel climate action combined with how credit unions operate can help us move forward?
Definitely. Thanks so much, Bryan. Well, let's start by talking about the fact that regrettably, we're in a place where climate change is affecting all of our lives. And I know sometimes, maybe to people in the group that can feel banal, but it's the most important thing for us to recognize that climate change is becoming increasingly severe. Canada had wildfires in every province this year. I know many conversations I have are with people mourning the loss of winter and wondering if we're aging into a world without winter. So losing cultural connections as well as physical safety. Across Canada this past December, on average, the country was 5 degrees warmer than it should have been. Not 0.5, but 5 degrees warmer than it should have been in December. All of that context is really important to high pace at which we need to change our economic and financial systems to really cut emissions and build resilience to climate change. So I think this idea of operating in a real economy or a financial economy that's separate from the natural world has put us in quite a significant pickle that we really need to confront very quickly. To keep warming to the safer levels of below 1.5 degrees, we need to cut emissions in half by 2030, and then reach net zero by 2050 or sooner. The government of Canada has a plan to do that, with certainly improvements to be made in lots of different areas, but the financial sector is quite a significant missing piece of that plan. And again, there are institutions and certainly lots of people working with institutions who are trying to move in that right direction of cutting emissions quickly and building resilience. But as a whole, the financial sector, so I mean banks, pension funds, insurers, asset managers, companies they're investing in, that entire sector is not on track to bring us towards a safe climate and to build resilience. So what really needs to happen is for every single investment decision to now be going through a climate lens for, real estate investments when you're building infrastructure, to think about how am I making this resilient to climate change and energy efficient, and not locking it into a reliance on oil or gas or fossil fuels. All of those investment decisions today are building the economy of tomorrow and the months and years after that. So really comprehensively, we need to address where money is flowing and how it's flowing. And like I said, the way I think about this is through financial policy, and really happy to get into that more. But maybe for now, I'll leave it with that stage setting of just saying, we don't have a lot of time to dally. In fact, we don't really have any left. And the investments that are made really at the top of these decision trees have very significant implications and repercussions for whether or not we and our families and communities get to live in a safe climate.
Wonderful. And Jayanne, I would love to have you hop in to talk about, because now running a large financial institution, what does it look like for this type of mission to now get the oak tree to shift a little bit and get in line with the mission of, I guess, supporting this work in climate action?
Yeah, so I think I would start with thank you, Julie, for what you're saying. I think there's that's the truth, right? That's where we're at, and it's not an easy transition, as we all know, right? So I have an electric vehicle, for an example, which is great, but all the component parts of my vehicle, the design of the vehicle, the tires, everything else is still not clean. So while my emissions might be lower, the vehicle itself is probably made with dirty, so I think it's for me, it's about helping to accelerate that transition and making that a possibility for businesses. We've already made commitments that we're not going to finance oil and gas, as an example. We've also made similar commitments around some other things, right? We're not going to finance arms. We're not going to finance companies that are using child labor. So we've made some of those sort of bolder statements. But that also is not a simple thing, because we want to help Indigenous communities, for an example. And many Indigenous communities have gas stations on their land because those were the industries that they were allowed to go into when they were allowed to build businesses on their land. So do we say no to an Indigenous community who wants a gas station, already has a gas station, because we're against oil and gas? It becomes a very complicated thing. But I think in general, we're pointing ourselves in the direction of two things. One, helping our members through these climate crises that Julie talked about. So how do we help our members be simple things like, is their house, are they flood proofed? Because the number one cause of damage to people's houses is actually from flooding. So how do we help them with very simple tools? How do we help them make sure they've got the right insurances, that we can finance properties, that we're looking at all the data so we can help, make sure that they're not buying something in a floodplain or whatever. So we're sort of trying to help them through the climate mitigation. And then we're working with making sure that as we're financing bigger projects, construction projects of affordable housing or construction projects of housing in general or whatever, that we're starting to impart that climate friendly, are you using all of the materials necessary to make sure that that facility is also, emitting less than it would have been using other products and services. So we think there's kind of a against, it's happening in front of us. So how do we help our members get through that? And also how do we help transition to a different way? And so certainly top of mind. And like I said, we're on a journey and having some of those very interesting conversations inside our organization around the fuzzy gray line between doing it the way we want to do it and doing it, but the way our members want us to do it, right? So, but I think I agree with Julie. I think more action is necessary. Like Libro, we have not said we're going to go out and sign some big declaration and make a big hoo-ha about it. We want to be an organization that actually does it in real time all of the time, right? So for me, it's more important that we do it than it is about saying we're going to do it.
And I love that. And Liz, would love for you to jump in as well as Libro now, the conversation going from just theory to action. How has it been with the mission of climate action and the conversation happened at your credit union?
Yeah, I think, we need to upskill ourselves as well. So, large credit union, but not large when we look at, our friends at the big five, certainly, right? And so what we've been doing is saying, yeah, we want to be able to deliver on our, emerging goals that we've set. And so we've really looked at kind of adding to our bench strength and our knowledge. So it's been a lot about communication and education amongst our board, our leadership, making sure we have the governance set up in place so our board know how to govern to climate accountabilities. And, this is new to them as well. And so they're keenly interested. And really a piece of that has been talking with our owners and knowing that, Jan talked about how do we start to build this into, how we're lending. We're talking a lot right now about how do we build this into our procurement. We have a lot of power in what we purchase, not just what we finance. And so we have a long way to go on that. I have a meeting tomorrow morning talking about how do we further build in some of these requirements into how we are purchasing things and who we are purchasing them from, so that we're looking for ways that, yes, we can do that certainly within our investing and within our lending, but what are some of the collaborations and the partnerships and the things that we can do to amplify that change with others as well. And so something we've been thinking about, when I think about business and agriculture is certainly, and we can't do this alone, or nor should we all be trying to tackle this on our own. But when we think about, I'm going to give an example. The Dairy Association has a net zero commitment, and now they have launched a transition plan for farmers in around dairy, right? And we're seeing that completely unrelated, but also just that they have it available as around. There are these transition plans, and there are these tools available in the cement space, right, around and whatnot. And so we think there's an opportunity to support some of these associations that are already starting to do this work that in turn support our owners. So how do we support our owners in making real change that not only impacts climate, but impacts the viability of their business and the ability for them to continue to operate in a cleaner manner and stay prosperous as well.
I love that. And again, with continuing that conversation about finance, Bryan, would you love to let us know how you contextualize this mission of climate action with the venture fund that you've been able to start putting together?
Yeah, I mean, we tackle that from a number of different lenses. I mean, I really like what Julie was saying from the financial climate that we have set up here, and as I see it in North America, is really it's tough to make decisions around climate action when you're looking quarter to quarter, right? Which is very much what I see in the North American hemisphere around things. And it's because when you're looking climate, you have to be looking 20, 30, 40, 50 years into the future and look at what those decisions mean. So for us in the fund, when we're looking at things, yes, it's important to move away from oil and gas. But, when we look at things such as the transportation sector, and, Jan mentioned that she's got an electric vehicle. In fact, going, on the transportation side, yes, that's an easy one relatively speaking. to go electrify, get off of oil and gas. But, how, she said, how are her tires made? How are all the different components, right? The amount that we use oil in our everyday lives is huge. So when we're looking at particular companies to invest in, we're trying to look at what are different ways they're out there to decarbonize. For example, one of our investments, the founder, he went out just with a mission to remove a gigaton of CO2 by 2050. So he set himself this big, crazy goal. Then he wanted to see where in industry could he have an impact. And it came across a process that they're using that right now in water treatment. So our water treatment plants around the world use a substance called acrylamide that basically gathers all the crap together so you can remove it out. The only way to do that, make that product today, is with another substance called acrylonitrile that's made from petroleum. So we treat our water with oil, basically, to do that.
Right.
So he has come up with a way to use captured CO2 and ethanol, so a plant-based substance, and to make the, without getting too technical, to make the stuff that's going to go into this that allows that industry to decarbonize. So that's how, when we're thinking about investments, how do we tackle, help those founders tackle those big problems, right? And tackle those big scale, big impact things. So we're looking from that lens, and then we're also looking, who else can we partner with from a financial perspective that can help us along that journey? Because these are, we help at the early stages, but when those projects get to the massive, you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars to bring them to scale. So, that's the lens we're looking to see. It's complicated, but we think there's enough smart people out there that can help solve this and just get the minds around
Excellent. it. And really appreciate that perspective. And Kat, we'd love to get your context on how you're tackling this mission with the current work that you're doing to improve climate action in Canada.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. I really liked what Julie, you mentioned about like really framing this around a climate crisis and what we really have to be responding to. I think what's really interesting about finance is that from like a climate perspective, it's very clear what we shouldn't fund in terms of like mitigation, in terms of the fact that we need to stop investments. And one thing that credit unions and other financial institutions can commit to, I think where the complexity is what do we continue to fund? And through what we fund and through what we invest in, what are those values that we're reflecting in within those investments? We talk a lot about commitments when it comes to mitigation, reducing emissions within our procurement. But I think on the other side of what we think about from the youth perspective is how do we deal with these concepts of like adaptation and responding to the climate crisis that are not so easily monetized and quantifiably that we're not able to quantifiably measure. And I think from a credit union perspective, there's a really interesting opportunity to fund adaptation work or create like low emitting options, something that is more readily accessible. But to actually calculate that when you're so far removed from the actual deployment of that strategy, I imagine it's very difficult for these types of organizations. So I think there's already an imbalance between like from the perspective of our vantage points when we work with equity deserving communities, sometimes mitigation efforts is not the main focus. A lot of times what the main focus is adaptation and being able to respond to the worst impacts of the climate crisis where there's incredible funding, COSR receding, and then how do you then as a financial institution balance what's the biggest priority when you do have members that to some degree are searching for some sort of return on investment or mitigation reduction, but adaptation is not something that you can perhaps quantify quite as much. So what we do at FVS, really, and not being a credit union or financial institution in traditional sense, but really start across the margin, at the margins, and try to understand from their perspective what they actually need. Because a lot of times we talk about these institutions and these investments from a very thematic sense. We want to invest in electric vehicles, we want to invest in affordable housing. But I think from our perspective is like who is actually benefiting from these investments and who has access to the benefits of these investments. And I think this is what Black Tech Capital is responding to, about who is actually being active participants in the next social economy. We do this through grants and empowering youth, but I think there's often quite a challenge when it comes to investments, who actually has access to this money, are the same people that have benefited from the climate crisis, the same people that are going to be benefiting from this next generation of investments. And I know these are all things that are being, actively thought about within a lot of these new financial institutions. But if we don't adopt this level of I would say reflection within that and really bring it back to climate mitigation, finance, and justice, then we are at risk of just perpetuating the same harms to the same people. So I think from that vantage point, like our mission is very inextricably linked to justice, and saying there is the finance out there, there is the tech out there, there is, this abundance that we can tap into to be able to tackle the climate crisis. But we still, regardless, need to focus more on these advocacy efforts to generate the political will to deploy these solutions and deploy them fairly and to deploy them through a justice lens. And this is where policy comes in.
Yeah, I would love for you to kind of continue on that vein with what would be an important collaboration that you'd want to see, Kat, to amplify the work that you're currently doing?
I think I would love to see more collaboration across the financial sector on these types of issues, on how everyone's collectively advancing these types of initiatives for more inclusion within the next social economy. I think with financial policy, we often have a disconnect when it comes to climate policy, finance policy, and policy in general, because financial institutions are generally trying to protect their own interests. I'm talking about like the big five banks. They're trying to maximize their money, and you have these lobby groups against these financial policies. I think from a credit union perspective, it'd be very interesting if we would have financial institutions that have social purpose woven into it, really step up to say like, this is the future that we're heading into, instead of trying to replicate the same kind of things that these big banks are trying to do. A lot of these people in the grassroots are acting to advance these new financial climate policies. But what we need are big players in the space, or medium to big players in the space, to also advocate for the same thing. So it doesn't feel like it's just coming from civil society. That pressure is coming from all aspects of what our nation is kind of looking for towards a new social economy. So that's something that I would personally love to see. Also, like, for example, in the US, they have community development financial institutions and very explicit avenues to support things like that for loans, venture capitalists, credit unions can be captured within there. And that's something that's really heavily supported by the federal government, versus in Canada, we don't have anything quite like that. I think we're moving towards the social finance fund and all these kinds of things, but there's no really governing kind of entity to help with navigating all these like community development oriented financial institutions. It'd be nice to see some collective work being done around that as well.
Makes sense. And before I go to the credit unions, I'd love to jump back to Julie and get your thoughts on what would be important collaborations or certain initiatives that would really amplify the work that you're currently doing.
I think maybe before I get into the specifics of some of the collaborations, what I would love for us all to be working towards is an economy where every impact is a positive impact investment, right? I said I come to this work as a previous impact investor. And what I think we really need to realize is that every single investment is an impact investment. Most of them just have a negative impact right now, right? We talk a big talk about affordable housing, but what's left unsaid is that every other investment is therefore unaffordable housing. Right? That's not what we should be investing in. Our money is going to banks through deposits, through investments, to our pension funds, and then that's putting money into building something, right? An investment is building something for the future. We should be structuring and working towards an economy where all of that is positive, and we're not putting our own money into building unaffordable housing and making profits off that. We shouldn't be using our money in a way that bites us back. So with that in mind, absolutely, I'd love to see more engagement from organizations who do have virtue, like credit unions, or even looking at renewable energy companies, right? I think there's a lot more room for policy engagement and advocacy from the organizations, financial and corporate organizations who are working towards the right things in their own work. As Kat mentioned, a lot of the other actors are working very hard to advocate for things to stay the same in an unequal and climate damaging way. For example, the big five banks in Canada, a recent international report just came out highlighting that they're advocating against net zero in a variety of ways. And I can share that report in the chat because it's really interesting to see organizations who publicly set net zero commitments, but then lobby the government to not move towards net zero. I think it's quite open information that oil and gas companies lobby the government to not move towards net zero. So a counterweight from organizations with virtue is welcome from civil society, and I think very, very important so that government policymakers understand that there is a broad swath of people and organizations and workers and job makers alike who want to see quick positive action on equitable climate movement. A second piece would be, related to that, is a really exciting piece of policy to align the financial sector with climate action called the Climate Aligned Finance Act. This is actually coming up on its 2-year birthday anniversary in the Canadian Senate. It was tabled 2 years ago on March 24th. And this policy would really, from the federal level, make so many small changes to our financial policy over and regulation to shift it so that the modus operandi is aligning with climate action in a way that respects Indigenous communities and protects biodiversity. It would really change to a whole new superseding duty of saying, let's think about what are the impacts from the investments we're making. I love Victor putting in the chat hashtag CAFA, which is that CAFA is the pithier name for the Climate Aligned Finance Act. And this is a really important piece of policy, which a lot of the opposition parties in government have gotten on board for, a number of elected officials have gotten on board for. And I think, most importantly, to represent how much people care about this issue, even though I said, everyone gets bored when I say climate finance policy all in succession, but hundreds of organizations and academics representing thousands of Canadians have signed on endorsing this bill, saying, we need climate aligned finance, and therefore we need the Climate Aligned Finance Act. So that's one example we're seeing, more engagement from organizations with virtue to help drive this forward would be really super.
Excellent. And Liz, would love to get your perspective as well. What are you seeing through the credit union and Libro, that initiatives that either need to be in place or collaborations in place, or those that already exist that really amplify your work?
Yeah, I think you spoke about, kind of those purpose-driven organizations having a larger voice and advocacy. And I would say we feel that's a role and a duty that we have. And I think we're still sorting out where it is that we can have the most impact. And so when we look at kind of our roadmap and our plan, collaboration and advocacy is something that we certainly know is going to be, we only have so many levers that we can pull to do some of this work. And that is certainly part of it there. So we're actually in the midst of hiring a government advocacy role. We had it, we are missing it right now. And they were had become quite in tune with what was happening. So right now, obviously we're very in tune with the regulatory environment, what's happening and what's being kind of imposed upon banks and financial institutions. And we're making sure that we understand that. And I think right now, I would say we're taking a role in making sure, we have small, mid, large size credit unions. And when we think of some of these, when you talk about kind of virtue organizations or purpose-driven organizations, and in the financial space, financial cooperative space, how are we supporting them and kind of even keeping up with what role they can play and what this looks like? And so that's been on our roadmap as well. So we're kind of co-leading the Canadian Credit Union System Climate Working Group and trying to help support small and mid-sized credit unions and understanding where it's possible for them and what role they need to play or where they need to kind of bring themselves up to speed to be able to have a voice in that. And so we talked a little bit about some of the work that we've done has had positive impact, and and we're not necessarily always sharing that message. And so not only doing that amongst the general population, because if more people were place their money within credit unions, you know, the impact that it has on society and the environment is the opportunity there is huge for positive impact. But then also taking it a step further, and how are we, what conversations do we need to be in, what levels of government, and so I think we're, you know, full transparency, still sorting that out. And understanding what role we have. And I think a piece of that is also understanding where our large, you know, where our owners who are most impacted in this space and around climate, where are they advocating? Where are they having concerns? And so that we can make sure we're bringing their voice to the table as well.
Excellent. And Jayanne, would love to see if from this credit union lens, if you'd want to add to it, are there collaborations that you want to see or are able to facilitate, or certain initiatives that Meridian involved in already?
I agree with all the speakers that this is going to take all of us doing things differently, right? And so I think Liz was very gentle in saying, but I'll be more bold. If you want the credit unions to step up, we need more members. We're not big enough. We don't even collectively across the country, we're 8% of the financial services, or maybe even 6%. We are tiny compared to the big banks. So those who are interested in supporting the idea of putting finance in service of people, planet, and prosperity, move your money to the credit unions, because we need momentum to be able to be the ones out there. So we are all punching above our weight in terms of being at policy tables and talking about things. But at the end of the day, we have we are not welcomed by the Minister of Finance the same way as the CEO of RBC is welcomed at the Minister of Finance, right? So Canadians in general are apathetic about where they put their money. They don't put it; they leave it in their banks, and they feel okay if their bank is starting to, sponsor the Black Opportunity Fund. I'm being real here, right? So like, everybody has to do something, and it starts with ourselves. And so I would say, everybody on this panel, if you're passionate about this, put your money in a credit union, because that's what's going to start growing it. It's member based. We are certainly on three key priorities. 1 is access to finance for all. 2 is helping our members plan for a future that's inclusive and clean. And 3, building financial confidence. We purposely did not use the word literacy, because literacy incites that I'm smart and you're not. And our job is really to be in behind you, helping you do whatever you need to do. So within that, collaboration is huge. And so the Afro-Caribbean Business Network and us are partnering on a micro loan. We've got partnerships going with BDC to help finance small businesses, entrepreneurs who come from all kinds of diverse backgrounds, who have not had a seat at the economic table. We're advocating and always looking for relationships to help advance whatever is necessary in the area that people are passionate about, right? Like Liz, we're looking at our procurement channels, and we're making changes to say, if you don't follow the same rules as we do, we don't want to do business with you. We want to make sure that we're doing it from all the way through the organization. That we're making sure that who we hire and what they do is indicative of the communities that we serve. We've got ESG ambassadors, and we've got every branch doing something. So we want to take care of our own organization and our own environment. We're a living wage employer. We want to make sure that our own people are treated well, and that they're doing everything they can to make the future brighter and more inclusive and greener. And at the same time, we're influencing our business members, and we're actually saying no to some things when a business comes to us and looks for a loan and we don't like what we see, we say no. So, but I think to get to the scale that we're desiring, sorry, but you're going to have to all put your money in a credit union so we get stronger and more robust as a change agent for the financial services sector, because it's in our DNA.
Just to jump in there, Ryan, yeah, and don't quote me on the stat, because I can't reference exactly, but the sentiment is that where you put your money has about 10 to 20 times the impact than making 11 different lifestyle choices and changes to support a greener economy. And so there's some, you could debate a bit of the stat there, but I mean it really speaks for itself, is that's where that's where you have the power.
We share a wealth platform across all the credit unions that has a big focus on sustainable investments, and it has the ability to bring in new investment opportunities for us all. We're driving that through our KPIs from a wealth management perspective. We've got green deposits and green loans to help those people who want to do so. So we're doing our part, and we would love to do more. But that requires scale. And so scale comes when more people join and say, yes, I want to put my money in a place that I believe fits my values, like you do when you buy other things, right?
Absolutely. And at minimum, even if you're at a traditional bank, having a credit union account as well. And we
right. Have a conversation, because we do it better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one thing, to shift gears just a little bit to Bryan and talking about now venture capital. What are your thoughts on attracting venture capital to a space when you're focused on clean tech and focusing on climate action? Are you finding it's hard to wrestle that money into this space? Or what collaborations would you want to see to amplify your work?
I mean, I guess I'll tackle that from a number of different points. I mean, collaborations that we have underway is more so with universities. So we've got collaborations with TMU, we've got collaborations with Guelph University under ag tech, because Canada does a great job of putting billions of dollars into universities and coming up with different innovations, but most of them, right? So we don't have the structure in our society to take those innovations and bring them out. So those are collaborations that we have underway right now. Collaborations that we're missing are more collaborations with business, because while there are a number of groups, and I agree, the oil and gas sector in particular are doing everything and lobbying against it. When the oil and gas has the largest delegations and the COP conferences, it's not for everybody else's benefit. But but there are more businesses out there that want to do things, but they just don't know how, right? So those are more collaborations I'd like to see. Say, hey, here, what's your problems? How can we help solve them? I was just talking with a researcher at TMU yesterday who's working in the water sector, but he wants to talk more with industry, because he goes, I'm solving some stuff, coming up with neat things, but I don't know if I'm necessarily doing the right things. So that's a collaboration that we work to help try and facilitate, because while I love different founders and what they're coming up with, they're sometimes not coming up with the right thing. So if we could collaborate more with industry, we'd get to the right thing. And then on the finance side, we do not see enough money go into this sector. And the challenge is, what I'm seeing from a lot of the financial institutions is the money's needed at the early stages. So but it's not big dollars, it's dollars into a larger number of smaller companies, knowing that a good percentage are going to fail, because that's just what's gonna happen as people try things, make it work. Some things work, some things don't. And how do we find mechanisms for those institutions to be able to deploy lesser funds? For example, I was talking to the McConnell Foundation, but their check sizes are massive, right? So how do we make something work for the smaller scales, right? And have not figured out the answer to that one yet, but that's another collaboration that I would like to see. How do we help the smaller scale businesses? Because what we see happening, and being a very proud Canadian, I don't like, is that businesses to get funded at the early stages are going south. They're going to the US. There were two women out in Alberta that were working in this great hydrogen solution, and they were trying for 6 months, getting a lot of maybes in the Canadian environment, went south of the border, within a month got funded, right? So this was before we were ready. So I don't like to hear those stories. So some of the smarter investors are realizing Canada's really great for coming up in innovation, but they don't fund it. So we can come in there and actually get a bargain on our dollar and do it. So I would love to see Canada start focusing more on those early stage and not waiting till it's later stage of the scale up before it's being funded. So that's a collaboration I see missing.
Yeah, and even just to continue the conversation a little bit with you, what priorities would you say you're working on right now to start to address getting that capital and being able to have the change that you want to seek with climate action?
I have conversations with anyone who wants to have conversations with me, and how can we work together? How can we collaborate together? I try to draw attention to the fact that those early stage what do we call pre-seed to Series A, it is a death valley, especially. It's a death valley in general for founders, and it's a death valley in Canada because there's very little going there, and especially on the climate side, right? And climate still has this reputation of being, it's not just, as Kat was saying, yes, we do need those places where money is going in, that you're measuring more impact than dollars. But there's quite a number of investments that you can make that you can get return on dollars as well too. So it's not like 2008, 2009, people were investing in that sector and then it collapsed, right? But the imperative is there. There's a lot showing that there's a lot of good investment and so education out there, piece by piece. And that's part of the messaging that I like to get out.
I appreciate that. And Kat, actually, I'll come to you next just to learn more about the key priorities you're currently working on as the mission continues.
Yeah, so we're actually launching a new strategy at the end of April with all of our funds. And we're launching an ambitious, I would say, strategy to raise more money for youth-led climate action, because this is a really key moment for cultivating the political will to deploy climate action and really strengthening civil society so that we can really be able to scale for impact. And we're going to kind of do this through 5 different streams. In the way that we disperse is obviously providing access to vulnerable and more marginalized communities, getting them in the spaces where their voices can be actually heard and where they can influence, but also people from northern communities that are most impacted by the climate crisis so they can actually have their voices heard in these really influential decision-making spaces, and then assembling people, getting people the actual opportunity. I think with youth-led climate action is actually very similar. It's not similar to venture capitalism, but in a way, it's really hard to find that small seed funding and getting that first vote of confidence to be able to actually pilot and try something out. Because until you're able to actually demonstrate that this is feasible to some degree, it's really hard to secure funding outside of these things. So getting people to assemble and pilot. And then the next, I think, other death valley that I would argue also exists is when you've been able to demonstrate value, and once you've been able to get these small grants, once you want to get into this medium stage, this is also a point where I feel like a lot of organizations drop off, because now you need to all of a sudden be able to get this grant for millions and millions of dollars, but there's really nothing between sometimes like almost this $50,000, $100,000 mark to this $250,000 mark. So there's this very niche opportunity to be able to incubate groups at that scale so that they're ready to go to maybe perhaps a more institutional funder to prove that they have the capacity to be able to scale up. So this is really what we're focusing on, about how do we use the money that we have to engage, contribute, leverage, equip, sustain, so that when they're going to the institutional funder and getting more money, that they're equipped with the governance systems, the strategic systems, the administrative systems, so that they can actually be able to very confidently say that they are ready to secure that money. I think at FES, because we have a really interesting vantage point. I think anybody that deploys money has a really unique spot in the sense that you're connected to investors, you're connected to who you invest, and you're connecting to perhaps policy. I think we're leaning a little bit more into how do we actually convene these spaces that we have a door in, that we have a foot in. So how do we actually bring people that are working on similar problems and issues together, whether that be across generations, that's through peer-to-peer networks, or that's across different sectors. So these are things that we're kind of trying to tap into, understanding your own positionality as both a funder and an advocate. How do we actually bring these people together to convene to be able to scale for impact?
Yeah, it makes sense. And Julie, would love to hear from you about, again, key priorities that you're working on, and that it's how we can, as an audience, amplify your work as well.
Thank you, Ryan. I think I've talked about some of the key priorities in terms of the Climate Aligned Finance Act is such an amazing piece of policy that would modernize, future-proof our economy in terms of shifting a lot of finance in the right direction, to put it simply. And there's a lot of opportunity for individuals to engage. I can give people a bit of a preview that next Monday, which will be the 2 years since it was tabled in the Senate, you'll likely be seeing on social media a number of videos, and we invite you to kind of post one yourself next Monday as well, sharing why is policy for finance to align it with climate action so important? Why do you as a person or as the organization you're working for understand that financial investments aligning with climate action is so important? So that's one preview and as well an invitation. And if anyone is curious about participating in that on the 25th, which is next Monday, posting a video, but I perhaps so that's a really exciting piece is progress on the Climate Aligned Finance Act. Another piece that Liz mentioned, I think right at the start, is transition plans. Most large financial institutions and companies globally and across Canada have targets to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050. Present company aside, a lot of organizations don't actually have plans to deliver on that target. So for example, again, looking at the banks, many of them don't have plans for changing their operations to align with the targets they've set. A number of companies don't have plans to align with the targets they've set on climate. And this isn't anecdotal. There's a lot of research, including from Oxford Net Zero, showing that most companies don't have plans to align with their climate commitments. So trying to move towards requiring credible climate transition plans that prioritize equity and integrity across the economy would be a really concrete way to bring us towards this economy where all investments have a positive impact. And that is one thing that the Climate Aligned Finance Act would help advance. Maybe lastly, I just want to really celebrate the energy that Jayan and Liz were bringing in terms of growing the credit union sector. I think that's so important. And the way I often talk to people about this is, we as individuals can act as citizens by engaging in policy, as I've been talking about quite a bit, engaging with your member of parliament, supporting the Climate Aligned Finance Act, as well as consumers, as many people start to think of first, are you zero waste? Are you buying, recycled yogurt containers? But also, are you switching your money and the investments to places that are aligned with positive action? So I think, certainly growing the credit union sector is one form of building the positive influence of these more, stakeholder aligned organizations. And then also back to your previous question, Ryan, it's a lot about collaboration, even if perhaps the Minister of Finance doesn't listen to one individual who's not the CEO of RBC, 10, 20, 30, hundreds and thousands of Canadians or people living in Canada saying we want to move in a certain direction does have a certain power. So I think that the collaboration aspect, talking about, yes, what's your individual action, and are you doing the positive things that you have an opportunity to do there? And then how do we engage together in collaboration, both as individuals and organizations?
I love that. And Liz, I'd actually love to hear from you. Similar calls to action for the audience. What can we be doing as a community to really move this work forward with climate action?
Yeah, I think, when I think about, we know the business case is strong for having a social purpose. We know that, workers are asking us for it, consumers are demanding it, investors. So I think in your role as consumers, asking questions from who you're purchasing from, who you're banking with, who you're doing business with. So I think coming up front with simply just asking those questions and being more informed about the power, your purchasing power. And so whether that be stuff, whether that be investments, et cetera. So I think just, collectively kind of talking about that, if we were all collectively moving to a place where we were asking those questions and making more informed choices and really understanding it. And I think we're starting to see that across many platforms. It's starting to give us that information, right? We're seeing that, and when you're flying, when you're we're seeing that rating systems on real estate MLS systems. We're starting to see that consciousness right in front of us to help us to make better decisions. And I think not to kind of beat the same drum, but really making sure that you are putting your money invested in a place that is having a positive impact. And so when I think about, even as a credit union, we're part of the Responsible Investment Association. And so that's a way also for us to amplify our voice, because Responsible Investment Association and, all of our investment specialists are now trained in responsible investing. And that not only from the investment itself, but that also advocacy work. And there's a lot of, that we sign on to and put our voice behind similar organizations that are having, their values are aligned. And so I think, and then I think about, when I think about us as a credit union system, Jan already talked about it, but how do we kind of work together to create awareness at scale of the credit union difference and and the significant impact that it can have?
I love that. And Jan, would love to get your closing thoughts and a call to action for those. I mean, I think you gave one already, kind of like go become a member, but curious if it's another call to action for the audience as well.
Yeah, and hey, I don't care which credit union you join whatever one fit, it's not about joining us, it's about just joining one. So I think, I think we're on the right path inside the organization. We're already net zero. We're doing the right work, getting our understanding, like Liz, data, do we have the right data? How do we influence our business and personal members? How are we building those relationships to ensure there is equity and money is not just going to the organizations and the people who've always had it, but it's going to the places. So we're doing all of that. I think there is more work to be done on banding together and thinking across the horizon of, well, who are all the influencers, as Julie talked about, or as Kat talked about, who are all the influencers, and how do you get an ecosystem system kind of perspective going in unison because quite frankly, with the economy the way it is right now, I've been watching and fearful that the tipping point between purpose and profit, we were kind of on the path, through the pandemic around, really that much more balanced perspective. But now that the economy has changed, you're seeing a lot of people pulling back on their investment in people, or, who reads the Globe and Mail, like there's no female CEO successions in any of the banks. Like that's wrong, right? So I am a bit concerned about that. So I think now's the time to put the pressure on to keep driving towards the future. As Julie said, we're out of time, we're out of choice. This is becoming an urgent issue. It affects the most vulnerable first. And I, at the stage of my career, I have kids, and, I wanted to make sure that the Indigenous thinking around how do we think 7 generations, we need to employ some of that into how we think. So advocating, collaboration, being part of the change is important, because I think we are at risk. You think about things like Trump coming on back into power, we're at risk of losing momentum, not gaining momentum. So now's the time to stand firm and keep pushing in the right direction, because it does in the long term. It saves our planet, which is the most important thing. B, I think that the case has been made that investing smartly in well-run organizations that have a social purpose and are clear on their commitments to climate actually make more money, and they have a much longer term horizon and sustainability. So that debate around, I think it has to go away, and I think we have to keep pushing towards the future we all want to create.
Excellent. And perspective. And Bryan, I'll go to you to get your closing thoughts. Any call to action for the audience?
I mean, the call to action really overall is just educate yourselves more, right? Unfortunately, as Canadians, we're very comfortable, right? We're not facing, for the most part, any immediate threats that we can see. We talk about the climate threats. Those of us here are well educated and know they're real, but in the Canadian context, people are comfortable. And how do we get uncomfortable? How do we get uncomfortable about the changes happening? How do we just not say, oh, this was a really warm winter, oh well, right? No, we can't just say, oh well, oh, we had so many days that we couldn't go outside last year because of all the forest fires across the country. Can't stop. You got to stop saying, oh well, right? And educate ourselves. And it doesn't take much, right? Even if it's just little action steps like Jan's calling for, supporting your credit union, supporting, those organizations that are doing things that are for your, and we have a huge opportunity coming up in front of us here we're seeing something in the neighborhood. I don't know how many, $70 trillion that's transferring in wealth from the baby boomer generation to the next generation. And, you know, a lot of it is changing who has control. I mean, there's a lot more women coming into wealth and control, right? And so now opportunity generate to that large group's wealth, money into something that's going to make a difference in the future. And Jan said it, and it still will make you money. It's not like you're throwing your money away, right? But just be educated about your decisions. Don't follow what you've always done, right? You know, my mother, bless her soul, you know, she'll vote liberal because she always voted liberal, right? Whereas to me, no, like look at who's running, who's representing you, and make your decision there. Don't just do it because you've always done it, right? So that'd be my call for action. Just do things with your eyes open versus you've always done it that way before. That.
And Kat, we'll close out with you. I did see you put into the chat that the Change Course website working towards encouraging the switch from credit unions or to credit unions from banks. So we'd love to get your thoughts on calls to action for our audience.
I just want to echo what everybody else has said so far, like put your money where your mouth is and educate yourself, but also in the same degree, like educate yourself, but then continue to pay attention to what's happening around us politically, culturally, and what are the things that we actually genuinely want to respond to. For example, like Julie's work with the Climate Aligned Finance Act, like these are things that people just don't pay attention to. We talk about climate, we talk about finance, we talk about policy, we need all these things, but so many people don't realize that this giant thing has been moving through our government for the past 2 years. So it's also about being honest with ourselves. And I know a lot of people don't want to get involved in policy. A lot of people don't want to get involved in politics, but the reality is that policy and politics set the tone for what we're going to hold ourselves accountable to over the next few years, more than the next decade even. So we need to challenge ourselves to get more involved in these systems and not adopt a sense of doom and gloom, because doom and gloom is kind of like the new way to oppress and suppress people from actively participating. So I think we need to move beyond doom and gloom and actually actively participate. We have a lot of interesting elections coming up that will set the tone in critical years for the next 4 years of exactly what our governments municipally, provincially, and federally are going to do. So get involved and ensure that we're holding these people accountable to actually represent the interests of people like us that are trying to advance this agenda, whether that's done in an individual level, volunteering, campaigning, or just trying to learn and just having these discussions. I think those would be my calls to action, enable a world where we have the financial system and just climate solutions.
Excellent. And again, I'd love to thank everyone for your time being present with us and your remarkable leadership. Julie did put into the chat if you wanted to help support the Climate Aligned Finance Act with a video on March 25th, do send her an email. So her email is in the chat. And we'll close out the conversation the way we always begin, the way we began, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. We really appreciate you being part of the Social Impact Conference, and it's going to continue in about an hour's time. So definitely take a break, grab something to eat, and we'll see you shortly. But thank you again to the panelists for this enlightening conversation. It was wonderful.